The familiar, comforting click of a key sliding into the lock of her own front door. A sound Eleanor Vance had longed to hear for weeks. A simple mechanical symphony that usually signaled peace, homecoming, the end of a long journey. But tonight, that click would precede the most dissonant, shattering chord of her life. She hadn't told anyone, not even her husband, Henry, that she was coming home early from her 2-month business trip, curating art collections across Europe. The exhibition in Florence had wrapped up nearly 3 weeks ahead of schedule, a triumph of organization and passion, and Eleanor wanted to surprise him. The 16-hour flight from Florence to Chicago had left her drained, the kind of bone-deep weariness that only intercontinental travel can bestow. Yet the thought of seeing Henry's face when she walked through the door, unexpected and beaming, had kept a spring in her step, a lightness in her heart through the jet lag. 8 years of marriage. They'd weathered their share of challenges. Of course. What couple hadn't? Henry, an investment manager at Midland Fidelity Bank, had always seemed to support her career, even when it took her away for weeks at a time. They had built what Eleanor firmly believed was a solid partnership, childless by mutual choice, both focused on their careers, on perfecting their beautiful home in the quiet, leafy suburb of Oakwood. Before we delve into the storm that awaited Eleanor inside, let us appreciate the calm she believed she was returning to, the quiet life she and Henry had built over 8 years in their Oakwood home, a life centered on careers, mutual respect, or so she thought. As her taxi turned onto Maplewood Drive, her street, a familiar sense of relief washed over her. Home, finally. But as the car approached their colonial-style house, something felt off. A sleek black BMW, one she didn't recognize, was parked in her usual spot in the driveway. "That's strange," Eleanor murmured, a tiny frown creasing her brow. Maybe Henry had bought a new car. She dismissed the thought almost immediately. He would have mentioned such a major purchase during one of their daily calls from Europe, calls filled with his reassurances and questions about her exhibition. As the taxi driver helped her with her luggage, Eleanor noted more discrepancies, each one a small, dissonant note in the symphony of her homecoming. The front garden, her pride and joy, had been completely redesigned. The carefully selected hypoallergenic plants she'd insisted on, due to her severe allergies, had been ripped out and replaced with vibrant, ostentatious hydrangeas. Beautiful, yes, but exactly the kind of flowers her immunologist had warned her to avoid. Even the exterior lighting had changed. The warm, golden sconces, painstakingly sourced from a New England artisan, a process that had taken them months to find just the right ones, were gone. In their place were harsh, modern blue LED fixtures that gave their charming colonial home an oddly clinical, almost unwelcoming appearance. Maybe he's planning a surprise renovation, she mused, though a knot of unease was beginning to tighten in her stomach, a feeling that suggested something far less benign. She paid the driver, wheeled her suitcase up the familiar bluestone path to the front door, and that's when she heard it unfamiliar music, a throbbing electronic dance beat drifting through the windows. Certainly not Henry's preferred jazz, nor her own classical compilations. It seemed entirely out of character for their household. The key slid into the lock. The click echoed, a little too loudly in the sudden silence of her own apprehension. She pushed open the door, a smile practiced for Henry still on her lips, and stepped inside. The real surprise was waiting for her. All right, in her kitchen, a blonde woman, heavily pregnant, was cooking dinner, wearing Eleanor's grandmother's vintage apron. That first moment, when your reality fractures, how does the mind even begin to catch up with what the eyes are seeing? A calm, almost casual voice uttering her name. "You must be Eleanor," from the lips of the stranger, a statement that felt less like a greeting and more like an announcement of her displacement, a confirmation that the alien landscape she'd stepped into was, indeed, meant to be her life. The blonde woman, Diane Shaw, as Eleanor would later learn, her supposed name was, turned from the stove, the wooden spoon still in her hand, her expression one of mild surprise. Not the shock or embarrassment Eleanor might have expected from someone caught trespassing. There was no panic, only a practiced, almost serene smile settling on her perfectly made-up face. Henry said you wouldn't be back for another 3 weeks, Diane continued, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather or a minor change in social plans. The casualness of it, the intimate knowledge of her schedule, the comfortable way this stranger occupied her space, her kitchen, wearing her grandmother's apron stretched awkwardly over that prominent baby bump. It all suggested something far beyond a brief, sordid indiscretion. Eleanor felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. The carefully curated gallery wall in the entryway, filled with photographs from their travels, their shared memories, had been replaced with large, aggressive abstract prints in neon colors, precisely the style of art she had professionally critiqued as soulless commercial work in her last published review. "Who are you?" Eleanor finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper, cracking slightly over the still pulsing electronic music. "And what are you doing in my home?" The woman reached for a tablet on the counter and, with a manicured finger, turned down the music. The sudden relative quiet felt even more unsettling. "I'm Eliza," she replied, though the name felt as false as the serenity in her eyes. She rested one hand on her baby bump in what seemed like a deliberately protective, almost proprietary gesture. "Eliza Carlyle. Henry didn't mention I'd be here, did he?" A small, knowing smile played across her lips. That's so typical of him, always putting things off until the last minute. Sarah's? Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. A relative needing somewhere to stay. No, Henry was an only child, his parents long retired to Florida. A friend in trouble, but why would she speak with such familiarity, with such an air of ownership? "I don't understand," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Where is Henry? Why are you in our house? What's happening here?" Eliza tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting to one of practiced sympathy that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh dear," she said, "this is going to be more awkward than I thought." Then, with an air of complete command, she turned back to the stove, stirring whatever was in Eleanor's copper pot. The woman was acting as if Eleanor was the intruder. "Henry will be home in about an hour," Eliza continued, her tone maddeningly conversational. "He's at our parenting class, Tuesday nights. You know, parenting class. The words hammered into Eleanor's consciousness. Her legs felt weak. She pulled out one of the kitchen chairs, new, like so much else in this strangely distorted version of her home, and sat down heavily, still in her travel clothes. She needed to see more, to understand the extent of this invasion. "I'm going to freshen up," she said stiffly, needing a moment alone, a moment to think, to try and make sense of the unthinkable. "Sure," Eliza replied, waving a hand dismissively. "Your things have been moved to the guest room. We've been using the master bedroom. Of course. Of course." The casual cruelty sent another wave of nausea through Eleanor. She left her suitcase in the kitchen and moved deeper into the house. Each room she passed a fresh testament to her erasure. Their neutral-tone living room now featured that vibrant, almost violent, purple sectional sofa, replacing their beloved vintage leather couch, a piece they'd found together in a little antique shop on a weekend trip years ago. The bookshelves, once filled with Henry's treasured history books and her own art volumes, now displayed only a few decorative objects and a handful of generic-looking books, spines unbroken. As she approached what had been her home office, her creative sanctuary, the place where she'd written catalog essays and organized exhibitions, the smell of unfamiliar spices from the kitchen was replaced by the cloying scent of baby powder. She pushed open the door and froze. It was a nursery. Pale blue walls, an elaborate crib, a mural of woodland animals where her desk, her files, her art books had once been. A framed ultrasound image hung prominently on the wall, Baby Bishop written beneath it in flowing script. In the hallway, more evidence of her vanishing, every frame picture of her and Henry. Gone, in their place, photos of Henry with Eliza, hiking, at a baseball game, at what appeared to be a baby shower with people Eleanor didn't recognize. The master bedroom was the final blow. The sanctuary she and Henry had created together was completely transformed. Their platform bed replaced with a traditional sleigh bed, The neutral palette Sarah had so carefully chosen was now a bold navy and white scheme. Eliza's clothes filled the closet space Eleanor had left half empty. On Henry's nightstand sat pregnancy books and another sonogram photo in a frame that read, "Daddy's little MVP." Our home, our life, how could he? How could this woman be so comfortable amidst the ruins of my happiness? Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, their bed that was no longer theirs, her legs giving out. This wasn't just an affair, this was a hostile takeover. The familiar jingle of Henry's keys in the entryway, a sound that once signaled comfort, the gentle rhythm of their shared evenings, now heralded the arrival of a man Eleanor was rapidly realizing she'd never truly known. His voice, cheerful and unsuspecting, drifted from the hall. "Babe, that rocker got delivered, but they sent the wrong color. I told them we need the—" His voice trailed off as he rounded the corner into the kitchen and saw Eleanor standing there, a silent, accusing statue amidst the wreckage of their life. For a brief moment, genuine shock registered on his face. His mouth opened and closed without sound, the color draining from his features. Then, as if a mask had slipped firmly into place, his expression shifted to one of practiced concern, the kind a doctor might use for a particularly delicate diagnosis. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carefully modulated, "you're back early." David Mitchell, no, Henry Bishop, had always been handsome in a conventional way, an athletic build maintained through regular tennis matches at the Oakwood Country Club. Sandy brown hair cut in an expensive but conservative style, blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. At 42, he looked younger than his age, especially in the casual polo shirt and khakis he wore now. But as Eleanor studied the man she'd been married to for 8 years, she realized she was seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The way his eyes darted between her and Diane, or Eliza, as she called herself, the slight, almost imperceptible tension in his jaw, the calculated distance he maintained, standing fractionally closer to the pregnant woman than to his wife. It all spoke volumes. "I've met Eliza," Eleanor stated, her voice cool, betraying none of the turmoil raging within. Henry nodded slowly, moving to stand beside the blonde woman. His hand automatically, proprietarily, went to the small of Diane's back, an intimate gesture that told Eleanor everything she needed to know about the depth and permanence of their relationship, or at least what they intended it to be. "I was going to tell you when you got back," Henry said, his tone rehearsed, smooth. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "Find out what exactly, Henry?" Eleanor pressed, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. "That you moved your pregnant girlfriend into our home while I was away. That you've redecorated the entire house, erasing every trace of me, that you've changed your phone number, effectively cutting me off. Which part, precisely? Were you planning to tell me?" He exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible look with Diane before answering. "All of it, Eleanor? I know this is a shock, but Eliza and I, we fell in love. It just happened." The cliche was almost worse than the betrayal itself. It just happened. As if an 18-month affair resulting in a pregnancy and a complete home takeover was some sort of unavoidable natural disaster. An act of God rather than a series of deliberate, cruel choices. "When did you plan to tell me?" Eleanor pushed, refusing to let him off the hook with such a flimsy explanation. "Eliza says you've been seeing each other for 1.5 years. That's half the time I was working on the European exhibition. The exhibition, by the way, that you encouraged me to take on, insisting it would be a wonderful opportunity for my career." A flash of something, guilt annoyance, crossed Henry's face. "I was trying to find the right time," he muttered. "The right time," Eleanor repeated flatly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "And that would have been when, exactly after the baby was born. On your first anniversary with her," Henry's jaw tightened. "This isn't productive, Eleanor. What's done is done. We need to talk about next steps." "Next steps," Eleanor echoed, feeling like a parrot, repeating phrases that made no sense in the context of her shattered reality. "Yes," Henry said, moving with an unnerving briskness to the dining room table where his briefcase sat. He opened it and removed a folder. "I've had papers drawn up, a divorce settlement. It's fair to everyone involved. He laid the documents on the table, between them, a physical manifestation of his calculated betrayal. Eleanor stared at him, at the papers, in disbelief. "You've already prepared divorce papers. It's better this way." "Eleanor," Henry insisted, his tone now more businesslike, as if he were closing a particularly distasteful deal. "A clean break. You get to keep focusing on your career, and Eliza and I can focus on our family." The casual cruelty of his words hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. 8 years of marriage, their shared history, their carefully built life, dismissed so easily, so clinically. "I need you to sign these tonight," Henry continued, his voice hardening. "My attorney advised that we resolve this quickly, for everyone's benefit." "Tonight?" Eleanor asked, incredulous. "You expect me to sign divorce papers? Papers I haven't even read, without consulting my own attorney, on the very night I discover my entire life has been a lie." Henry's expression hardened further. "It's a generous settlement. Eleanor, you get to keep your art collection, your personal investments. I'm not trying to take advantage of you." She approached the table, glanced at the papers without touching them. Even from a cursory look, she could see it was far more than just divorce papers. There were documents related to their joint accounts, the house, and something about the Atherton Charitable Trust. "Why are there documents about my family's foundation in here?" she asked, a new, sharper suspicion beginning to form. "Just formalizing the separation of our financial interests," Henry said smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. "You know, I've been helping manage some of the Atherton investments. This just clarifies that I'll no longer have any involvement." Something didn't add up. Henry had indeed helped with some investment advice for her family's foundation, but he'd never had signing authority or direct access to those accounts. When the person you've built a life with looks at you as if you're merely an obstacle to be managed, a loose end to be tied, where does the heart find a place to even begin to grieve what's been so callously discarded? Her phone vibrated, a lifeline in the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room, a silent scream against the audacity of Henry's betrayal. It was Susan Albright, her oldest friend, her confidant since college, and, crucially, a senior compliance officer at Midland Fidelity Bank. The text was urgent. "Eleanor, don't sign anything. Something's wrong with the Atherton account. Call me ASAP." The words on the small screen seemed to leap out, confirming the icy dread that had begun to coil in Eleanor's stomach. This nightmare, she was starting to realize, extended far beyond marital infidelity, spiraling into realms of calculated financial deceit she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Eleanor glanced up, her gaze sweeping over Henry and Diane, who were watching her intently, their expressions a strange mixture of impatience and masked anxiety. "I need time to review these," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady, buying herself a precious moment. "And I need to speak with my own attorney." "There's no time for that, Eleanor," Henry insisted, his voice taking on an edge she'd rarely heard, a harshness that stripped away any lingering pretense of concern. "I need you to sign these papers and move out, as soon as possible, for the baby's sake." There it was again, for the baby's sake, as if an unborn child, a child born of deceit, somehow entitled them to her home, to rush legal proceedings, to erase her life. "Move out," Eleanor repeated, the absurdity of it all threatening to overwhelm her. "This is my house, too. Henry, my name is on the mortgage. Where exactly do you expect me to go tonight?" "You can stay at a hotel for a few days," Diane interjected smoothly, her voice like oil on troubled waters, yet somehow making the situation even more infuriating. "Just until you find a more permanent arrangement. We've already packed some of your essential items." She gestured toward a suitcase Eleanor hadn't noticed before, sitting innocuously by the kitchen door. "The rest of your things are in storage." "You packed my things?" Eleanor felt her composure slipping, the carefully constructed dam of her self-control beginning to crack. "You put my possessions in storage without my permission. We needed the space." "Eleanor," Henry said unapologetically, his callousness breathtaking, "for the nursery and Eliza's things." "This is insane," Eleanor whispered, shaking her head. "You can't just erase me from my own life and expect me to cooperate." "Be reasonable, Eleanor," Henry said, his tone patronizing, grating on her already frayed nerves. "This situation is difficult for everyone. The sooner we resolve it, the better." As he spoke, Eleanor noticed Diane moving toward the kitchen island where her purse sat. The blonde woman casually removed something that looked like a prescription medication bottle, swallowing a pill with a glass of water. "What's that?" Eleanor asked, momentarily distracted. "Prenatal vitamins," Diane answered smoothly, almost too quickly. "Doctor's orders." David, Henry, placed a pen on top of the papers. "Eleanor, please, just sign the documents, then you can go, and we can all start moving forward." "I'm not signing anything tonight, Henry," Eleanor said firmly. "And I'm not leaving my house." Henry's expression darkened. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "Am I?" Eleanor countered, a spark of defiance flaring within her. "You've been having an affair for over a year. You moved another woman into our home, changed the locks on my office, disposed of my belongings, and prepared legal documents I've never seen before, documents that apparently involve my family's foundation. But I'm the one making things difficult. You were never here," Henry snapped, his composure finally cracking, his voice raw with resentment, "always at some gallery, or exhibition, or auction. What did you expect?" "I expected fidelity." "Henry," Eleanor retorted, her voice cold and clear. "It's generally considered a basic component of marriage." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Marriage requires presence. Eleanor, you chose your career over our relationship years ago." "That's not fair," Eleanor protested. "We agreed on our priorities together. You encouraged my career. You said you were proud of my work." "Things change, Eleanor," Henry said, his gaze flicking towards Diane. "People change. I want a family, something you were never interested in." Before Eleanor could respond, her phone rang again. Susan. She knew she had to take this call. "I need to use the bathroom," she said abruptly, an idea forming, a desperate plan to get some space, to get information. "The powder room is being renovated," Diane said quickly, a little too quickly. "Use the guest bath. Upstairs." Eleanor nodded and headed for the stairs, feeling Henry's and Diane's eyes burning into her back. Once inside the guest bathroom, also redecorated in a style she didn't recognize, another layer of her life painted over, she locked the door, her heart pounding, and answered the call. "Susan." "What's going on?" she whispered. "Eleanor, thank God." Susan's voice came through, tense with worry. "Where are you? Are you at home?" "Yes, and you won't believe what I found," Eleanor began, but Susan cut her off. "Listen to me, Eleanor. Don't sign anything Henry gives you. Don't agree to anything. There's something seriously wrong." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, her earlier suspicion crystallizing into a chilling dread. "Henry's been making unauthorized transactions from the Atherton Foundation accounts," Susan explained rapidly, her voice low and urgent. "He somehow got access to the signature cards. He's been systematically moving money offshore for months." Eleanor felt the room spin. "How much?" she choked out. "At least $3.2 million that we can trace so far," Susan said grimly. "And Eleanor, that's not all. That woman he's with, Diane, or whatever she's calling herself, she's not who she claims to be. This isn't just about him wanting me gone. It's the trust, my family's legacy." "Oh, Henry, what have you done?" Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bathtub, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight, the cold porcelain a stark contrast to the heat of fear and betrayal coiling within her. Susan's words echoed in the redecorated guest bathroom, each syllable a hammer blow against the crumbling facade of her life. "What do you mean?" "She's not who she claims to be," Eleanor whispered, keeping her voice low despite the running water she'd turned on for privacy, a trick learned from old spy movies, now a desperate measure in her own surreal drama. "Her name isn't Eliza Carlyle, or Diane Shaw for that matter," Susan explained urgently from the other end of the line. "It's Brenda Holloway. She's a known financial fraudster. Eleanor. She's been investigated for similar schemes in Boston, Miami, Seattle. She targets wealthy individuals, especially those with access to family money or significant investment accounts." Eleanor's mind raced, pieces of the horrifying puzzle falling into place with sickening clarity. Henry's insistence on her taking the extended European assignment, giving him months of unfettered access. The sudden, almost theatrical pregnancy announcement upon her return. The intense, almost desperate urgency to get her signature on those papers tonight. The pregnancy? Eleanor breathed, a new, even more grotesque suspicion dawning. Is it even real? Based on her previous modus operandi? Probably not, Susan replied, her voice grim. In the Seattle case, she wore a prosthetic pregnancy belly to gain sympathy from the target's family, even concocted a whole story about carrying twins. Eleanor's mind flashed to Diane, Brenda, and her almost performative way of touching her belly, the conveniently timed prenatal vitamin, the way the bump had seemed to shift unnaturally when she reached for the glass of water. How do you know all this, Susan? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. After I noticed the suspicious transfers from the Atherton accounts, I flagged it for compliance at Midland Fidelity. Of course, Susan explained. They've been building a case for weeks. I wasn't supposed to tell you. Eleanor, they were worried about tipping them off. But when you texted that you were home early, I knew you were walking into something incredibly dangerous. Dangerous. The word hung in the air. Do you think they would hurt me? Eleanor asked, the question a cold stone in her stomach. I don't know, Eleanor, Susan admitted, her voice heavy. But in the Seattle case, when the victim refused to cooperate, valuable artwork and jewelry mysteriously disappeared from their home. In Miami, another victim's identity was stolen after they signed what they thought were innocent documents. They're trying to get you to sign papers tonight. You said, yes. Eleanor confirmed, the full scope of the situation becoming terrifyingly clear. Not just divorce papers, documents about the Atherton Foundation. Don't sign anything, Eleanor, Susan emphasized, her voice like steel. The FBI has been notified. They're already involved, because the Foundation's accounts cross state lines. It's federal jurisdiction. The FBI? Stunned? Eleanor repeated the acronym. Yes, Susan confirmed. Eleanor, I need you to stay calm and stall them. Can you do that? Just find excuses not to sign. Don't leave the house if you can help it. Help is on its way. How long can you stall them? Eleanor glanced at her watch. It was just past 7:00 up. How long until they arrive? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know exactly, but soon, Susan promised. They were already monitoring the situation. Knowing you're there will accelerate their timeline. Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath. Okay, she said, a new, cold resolve beginning to form amidst the fear. I'll stall. Be careful, Susan. You too, Eleanor, Susan warned. Henry and this Brenda Holloway, they've been moving money for months. They're not amateurs. After ending the call, Eleanor stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, travel-worn, shocked, betrayed. But underneath the hurt, something else was emerging: determination. This wasn't just about Henry's infidelity anymore. This was fraud. This was theft. They were trying to use her, to destroy her, to access her family's charitable foundation, money dedicated to arts education for underprivileged children, a cause dear to her late mother's heart. She splashed cold water on her face, ran her fingers through her hair, and steeled herself for what was to come. She had to keep them talking, keep them believing she might eventually cooperate until help arrived. Downstairs, she found Henry and Brenda in what appeared to be a hushed, tense conversation that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. Everything okay? Henry asked, his voice overly casual. As well as can be expected, Eleanor replied, moving toward the dining table where the papers still lay. She pulled out a chair and sat down, her movements deliberate. I've been thinking about what you said, Henry. I need to understand what I'm signing. Walk me through these documents. Relief, unmistakable and profound, flashed across Henry's face. Of course, Eleanor, that's reasonable. He sat down across from her, pulling the stack of papers closer. For the next 20 minutes, Henry explained the documents, or rather, the version of the documents he wanted her to believe existed. He spoke of equitable distribution of assets, her retention of personal property, his assumption of the mortgage. What he didn't explain, and what Eleanor, now armed with Susan's warnings, could clearly see, were clauses transferring signing authority on accounts, powers of attorney for financial decisions, and specific authorizations related to the Atherton Foundation's investment portfolio. In this section, Eleanor asked, pointing to a paragraph buried deep on page 17 about the transfer of management responsibilities for existing philanthropic endeavors. What exactly does this mean for the foundation? Henry barely glanced at it. Oh, that's just formalizing that I'll no longer be advising on the Atherton Foundation investments. You'll retain full control, of course. A lie? The clause actually authorized Henry to act as an agent on behalf of the foundation for a period of 3 years. I see, Eleanor said, turning to the next page. And what about our art collection? I don't see it mentioned specifically. It's covered under personal property, Henry assured her smoothly. You keep your pieces, I keep mine. Fair division. Another lie. A separate document in the stack, one he hadn't shown her yet, included an inventory of art assets and their transfer to a newly formed LLC, one that Eleanor suspected she would have no actual control over. As Eleanor continued to ask questions, drawing out the process, she noticed Diane growing increasingly anxious. The blonde woman checked her watch repeatedly and kept glancing at her phone. Is there somewhere you need to be, Eliza? Eleanor asked innocently. No, Diane said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Just checking the time. It's getting late. Henry shot Diane a warning look before turning back to Eleanor with a forced smile. We have plenty of time to go through this properly. Eleanor, I want you to feel comfortable with everything. It's in these moments of extreme pressure, isn't it, that true character is often revealed, both the deceiver's desperation and the survivor's unexpected wellspring of courage. Eleanor nodded, pretending to read another page with meticulous care, her mind racing, calculating how much longer she needed to hold out. Susan's text had said 15 minutes, and that had been, how long ago now? Maybe 10 minutes had passed. Just a little longer. This mentions an offshore account, she said, pointing to a line of dense legal text. In the Isle of Man, we don't have any offshore accounts. Henry, a flash of annoyance, quickly suppressed, crossed his face. That's just standard legal language. Eleanor, it's covering all bases for assets disclosure. Standard legal language for accounts he'd already established to funnel money from her family's foundation. She thought grimly. I see, Eleanor murmured, turning another page with deliberate slowness. And these investment accounts listed here. I don't recognize some of these numbers. Those are the Atherton Foundation accounts, Henry explained smoothly. They're included for reference only, to show they remain separate from our personal assets. He even had the audacity to point to signature lines authorizing their control, presented as if they were merely confirming her continued sole ownership. She checked her watch, as casually as she could. Almost an hour had passed since she'd spoken to Susan. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Diane was practically vibrating with nerves, her eyes darting between Eleanor, Henry, and the front windows. I think I need something to drink before we continue, Eleanor said, standing up. This is a lot to process. I'll get you some water, Diane offered quickly, starting to rise. Actually, I'd prefer wine, Eleanor replied, a sudden, risky idea forming. There should still be some Barolo in the cellar, unless you've replaced that too. Henry and Diane exchanged another look, a flicker of something unreadable in their eyes. I'm afraid we don't keep alcohol in the house anymore, Eleanor, Henry said, his voice tight. Because of the baby. Of course, the non-existent baby. Their all-purpose pretext for every cruel convenience. Water is fine then, Eleanor conceded, watching as Diane moved to the refrigerator. As Diane reached up to retrieve a glass from a cabinet, Eleanor noticed it again, that subtle, unnatural shift of her pregnant belly to the side, a movement no real pregnancy would allow. It was unmistakable. Susan had been right. The pregnancy was a prop, a cruel piece of stagecraft in their elaborate deception. Diane handed Eleanor the water, and their eyes met for a fleeting moment. Eleanor thought she detected a flicker of genuine concern, or perhaps fear, in the other woman's gaze, as if sensing Eleanor's growing awareness, her dawning comprehension of their lies. "Thank you," Eleanor said, taking a deliberate sip. "So, David, Henry," she corrected herself, "you mentioned I would need to move out tonight. Where exactly are my things? You said storage, but which facility? Safe keep on Riverside Drive." Henry answered, a little too readily. "Everything's in a climate-controlled unit. I have the access information in my office." Eleanor nodded, wondering if her belongings were actually there, or if that was yet another lie in a mountain of them. "And my family photos," she pressed. "The albums from my parents, my grandmother's jewelry." She knew these items would be particularly valuable and easy to sell. "All safely stored," Henry assured her, though his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "We were very careful with your personal items." Eleanor set down her water glass with a deliberate, resounding click. "You know what I find interesting? Henry," she said, her voice deceptively calm, "you keep saying we. We packed your things, we needed the space, we were careful, as if Eliza, or Brenda, has equal say in what happens to my possessions, in my home." Henry's jaw tightened. "Eliza is going to be my wife. Eleanor, she's carrying my child. Of course, I include her in decisions." "Your wife," Eleanor repeated, incredulity lacing her tone. "You haven't even filed for divorce yet, but she's already your wife in all the ways that matter." "Yes," Henry replied coldly. Eleanor turned to Diane, who had been watching their exchange with calculated attentiveness. "How far along did you say you were, Eliza?" 8 months, Diane confirmed, one hand automatically moving to her belly. 32 weeks. "That's interesting," Eleanor said casually, "because 8 months ago, Henry and I were in Napa Valley, celebrating our anniversary. He didn't mention he had a pregnant girlfriend then." Diane's expression didn't waver. "I wasn't pregnant then. We've only known about the baby for 5 months." "I see," Eleanor nodded, as if accepting this. "So you got pregnant after knowing each other for what? A year. That's fast." "When you know, Diane replied with practiced serenity. "Enough about the timeline," Henry interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with this line of questioning. "Let's get back to the documents. If we can finish tonight, you can take the signed copies with you." "Take them where, exactly?" Henry, Eleanor asked, checking her watch again. "Nearly 9:00 p.m. You still haven't told me where I'm supposed to go." "The Grand Heritage Hotel has availability," Henry said. "I checked this afternoon. They can accommodate you for as long as needed." "How thoughtful," Eleanor said dryly. "You checked hotel availability before I even knew I needed a hotel." Henry's patience was visibly wearing thin. "Eleanor, please, just sign the papers. You can have your attorney review everything afterward if you're concerned, but I need these signatures tonight." "Why the rush?" "Henry," Eleanor pressed, "if this is all above board and fair, as you claim, why does it have to happen right now?" He glanced at Diane before answering. "My attorney advised completing this as quickly as possible, for clean closure." "Your attorney advised getting signatures without independent legal review?" Eleanor asked skeptically. "That seems unlikely for any reputable lawyer." Henry's expression hardened. "You're being difficult on purpose." "No, Henry, I'm being cautious," Eleanor corrected, "which seems reasonable when my husband of 8 years ambushes me with divorce papers and a pregnant girlfriend in one evening." Diane stepped forward, her voice taking on a harder edge than before. "David, this isn't working. She's not going to sign tonight." "She will," Henry insisted, turning back to Eleanor. "Look, I've been more than patient. I've explained everything. I've offered a generous settlement. I've arranged accommodation for you. What more do you want?" "Time, Henry," Eleanor said simply. "Time to process, time to review, time to consult my own attorney. We don't have time." Henry snapped, his mask of composure slipping further. "These need to be executed tonight." "Why?" Eleanor challenged. "What happens at midnight? Do you turn into pumpkins?" Diane's hand closed around Henry's arm, a warning gesture. "Henry, enough. We can revisit this tomorrow." But Henry shook her off, leaning across the table toward Eleanor. "Sign the paper, Eleanor, now, or things will become much less pleasant." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine at his tone, but she maintained her composure. "Are you threatening me, Henry?" "I'm stating facts," he replied coldly. "You can make this easy, or you can make this difficult. Your choice." As tension filled the room, Sarah noticed Diane checking her phone again, typing something quickly before putting it away. The woman's nervousness was becoming more palpable by the minute. Just then, Eleanor's own phone vibrated with an incoming text. Glancing down, she saw Susan's name and a simple message, ETA 5 minutes. Her heart leaped. 5 minutes. She just needed to stall a little longer. "Let me think about this," Eleanor said, picking up the stack of papers, leafing through them as if reconsidering. "If I sign tonight, what exactly happens next?" Henry seemed to relax slightly, believing she was finally cooperating. "You'll take these copies with you to the Grand Heritage. Tomorrow, the transfers will be processed through our respective attorneys. By the end of the week, everything will be officially separated." "And the house?" Eleanor asked. "When would I need to formally move out?" "Technically, you'd have 30 days, Henry replied. "But given the circumstances, sooner would be better for everyone." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "And my personal items at this storage facility, I'd have immediate access." "Of course," Henry assured her. "I'll text you the unit number and access code tomorrow." "Not tonight. Tomorrow." Another red flag. Just then, a firm, authoritative knock echoed through the tense silence of the dining room. All three of them jumped. Diane backed away from the window, her eyes wide with a new, sharper panic. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice that cut through the charade, a voice that left no room for misinterpretation. "FBI, open the door." Oh, when the masks finally fall, the truth, however ugly, has a stark clarity. And sometimes, it's in that raw exposure that the first step towards healing can, paradoxically, begin. Eleanor moved toward the front door, but Henry suddenly lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Don't!" he hissed. "We can still fix this." Eleanor wrenched her arm free. "It's over! Henry!" Before anyone could react further, the front door burst open. 4 agents and FBI windbreakers swarmed into the foyer, weapons drawn. "FBI hands where we can see them," shouted the lead agent, a tall woman with short dark hair and intense, focused eyes. Henry raised his hands slowly, his face ashen. Beside him, Diane did the same, though her eyes darted frantically around the room, as if still seeking an escape. "Eleanor Vance?" the female agent asked, quickly scanning the room. "That's me," Eleanor confirmed, stepping forward, her own hands visible. "Agent Rebecca Miles, FBI Financial Crimes Division," the woman said, holstering her weapon as other agents moved to secure Henry and Diane. "Are you all right, Mrs. Vance?" "I'm fine," Eleanor assured her, though fine seemed like a gross oversimplification of her emotional state. Agent Miles nodded, then turned her attention to the other two. "Henry Bishop, Brenda Holloway, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes and attempted theft from a charitable foundation." As the agents began to handcuff Henry, he struggled briefly. "This is a misunderstanding, Eleanor. Tell them this is just a divorce matter." Agent Miles ignored his protests, continuing to recite his rights. The agent handling Diane, Brenda, had a more difficult time. As he attempted to cuff her, Brenda's pregnant belly shifted dramatically to one side. "Careful with that," Brenda snapped, her voice laced with venom. "It's expensive." The agent paused, looking down at the prosthetic in confusion. "Ma'am, I need you to remove that device." Brenda glared but reached under her shirt with her still free hand, unfastening something. The entire pregnancy belly came away in one piece, revealing her slim frame underneath. She dropped the sophisticated prosthetic onto the floor with a dull, resonant thud. Eleanor stared at the discarded fake belly, a grotesque parody of motherhood lying on her polished oak floor. Even knowing, intellectually, from Susan's warning that the pregnancy was likely a sham, seeing the physical evidence of the deception was jarring, a tangible symbol of the elaborate, cruel lies that had been constructed around her, intended to ensnare her. Agent Rebecca Miles approached Eleanor while the other agents continued processing a now silent Henry and a spitting, furious Brenda Holloway. "Mrs. Vance," Agent Miles said, her voice steady but empathetic amidst the lingering chaos and the quiet efficiency of her team. "I know this is a shock. We've been building this case for several weeks based on financial evidence, but we weren't expecting to find you here tonight. According to our information, you weren't due back from Europe for another 3 weeks. I finished my work early," Eleanor explained, feeling oddly detached as she watched the scene unfold in her own living room, a room that felt both intimately familiar and terrifyingly alien. "I wanted to surprise my husband." A flicker of sympathy, quickly professionally veiled, crossed Agent Miles's face. "Quite a surprise. All around, it seems. We need to ask you some questions, but they can wait until tomorrow if you prefer. You've been through a tremendous ordeal." "No," Eleanor said, a newfound firmness in her voice. The initial shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, burning need for answers, for the complete, unvarnished truth. "I want to understand what's happening. What exactly were they doing?" Agent Miles gestured toward the dining table, where the offending documents still lay. "May I?" she asked. Eleanor nodded. The agent, pulling on a pair of gloves, carefully flipped through the papers. "Based on our investigation, your husband, Henry Bishop, and his accomplice, Brenda Holloway, were attempting to gain control of your family's charitable foundation, the Atherton Charitable Trust, through fraudulent documentation." Agent Miles paused, then continued. "These papers, the ones Mr. Bishop was pressuring you to sign, contain hidden clauses that would have given them signing authority over the Atherton Foundation accounts. They have already managed to transfer over $3.2 million to offshore accounts in the Isle of Man. But they needed your signature, your authorization on these specific forms, to access the bulk of the Foundation's assets, the principal endowment, I believe." Eleanor felt sick. The divorce, the supposed generous settlement, it was all just a part of the scheme, a smokescreen. The divorce, was that just part of it too? The divorce was real enough, Agent Miles confirmed, or at least the intent to legally dissolve the marriage was, but it was expedited and structured to their advantage. Had you signed these papers tonight, Mrs. Vance, you would have unknowingly surrendered not just your marital assets, but effective control of your family's foundation. From the foyer, Eleanor could hear Henry still protesting as agents led him toward the door. "Eleanor, don't listen to them. This is all a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake." Brenda Holloway, in contrast, remained coldly silent, her calculating eyes fixed on Eleanor with an expression of unmistakable, venomous hatred. "How did you find them?" Eleanor asked Agent Miles, needing to understand how this intricate web had begun to unravel. "Your friend, Susan Albright at Midland Fidelity Bank," Agent Miles explained. "We received a report from compliance officers there about suspicious transfers from the Atherton Foundation accounts. The pattern matched previous cases involving Ms. Holloway. When we began surveillance, we discovered her connection to your husband." The agent picked up one of the documents from the stack, pointing to a particular clause embedded deep within standard divorce language about asset division. "This is especially sophisticated work. The authorization for wire transfers, the granting of power of attorney over foundation assets, it's all embedded within seemingly innocuous legal phrasing. Most people wouldn't catch it without careful, independent legal review." Eleanor thought back to Henry's desperate insistence that she sign immediately, without consulting her own attorney. The urgency, the pressure, it all made sickening sense now. "Were they working alone?" Eleanor asked, remembering Diane's, Brenda's, nervous phone checks, her muttered comment about someone coming at midnight. "No," Agent Miles confirmed. "We've identified at least 3 other accomplices. 2 were apprehended approaching the back of your property just as we entered. They were in a cargo van." Her radio crackled, and she listened briefly, her expression hardening. "The 3rd has just been apprehended 3 blocks away, attempting to flee in a rental van." "A van," Eleanor repeated, "based on previous cases involving Holloway's ring," Agent Miles explained. "They likely plan to empty your home of valuables tonight. Art, jewelry, electronics, anything easily transported and sold. The redecorating wasn't just about Ms. Holloway asserting dominance. It was partly preparation for stripping the house of anything valuable. Elizabeth Kaplan, Brenda Holloway, and her accomplices target wealthy individuals with access to family money or investment accounts. They've stolen over $12 million in the last 3 years using variations of this exact scenario. A cold thought struck Eleanor. And Henry, was he a victim too? Initially manipulated by her, she almost hoped it was true. A desperate desire for some small piece of the man she thought she'd married to be salvaged from the wreckage. Agent Miles's expression, however, hardened slightly, and Eleanor knew the answer before she even spoke. Initially, Mrs. Vance, we considered that Mr. Bishop might have been manipulated, unaware of Ms. Holloway's true intentions. However, electronic evidence recovered from his office computer and from encrypted messaging apps shows he was a willing and active participant once he understood the potential financial gain. He's been actively assisting with the fraud for at least 6 months, possibly longer. In fact, Agent Miles added, her voice carefully neutral, some of the more aggressive elements of the plan, the parts designed to discredit you, appear to have originated with him, not Ms. Holloway. The confirmation of Henry's willing, eager participation, his instigation of the cruelest parts of the plot, hit Eleanor like a physical blow. This wasn't just infidelity or a midlife crisis fueled by greed. This was calculated, criminal, and deeply personal. He hadn't just wanted her money, he wanted to erase her, to destroy her credibility. The man she shared her life with, who was he? Agent Miles continued. Among the evidence recovered from their communications and from a cloud server they were using was a detailed plan for what they termed Phase 3. Phase 1 appears to have been information gathering and setting up the financial diversions. Phase 2 was isolating you from your assets and obtaining the necessary signatures, what they were attempting tonight. Eleanor almost didn't want to ask. And Phase 3. Agent Miles's professional demeanor softened slightly. I tell you this not to frighten you further, Mrs. Vance, but so you understand the seriousness of what you've escaped. Phase 3 involved installing hidden cameras throughout your home. We've located several already, disguised in smoke detectors and light fixtures. They were installed approximately 7 months ago, before you left for Europe. The footage was being stored on a secure cloud server. It appears they were monitoring your routines, your conversations, even your private financial discussions, likely looking for passwords, account details, anything they could use. The violation felt profound, deeper even than the financial fraud or marital betrayal. Her most private moments, surveilled, analyzed, exploited by the man she had trusted most. And it gets worse, Agent Miles said gently. Phase 3 also involved opening new lines of credit in your name, maxing out existing accounts, and they had prepared documentation, fabricated medical records, emails to a non-existent therapist allegedly from you, expressing paranoid thoughts. They were building a case to question your competency, to ensure you would be in no position to challenge their actions once discovered. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warmth of the house. They hadn't just planned to steal her money. They had prepared to destroy her reputation, perhaps even her freedom. 6 months, half a year had passed since that night of shattering revelations, a night when the foundations of Eleanor Vance's world had crumbled beneath her feet. The clinking of champagne glasses and the appreciative murmur of voices now filled the Chandler Modern Art Gallery in downtown Chicago, a soothing balm compared to the harsh commands of FBI agents and the thud of a discarded prosthetic belly. Tonight, Eleanor stood not as a victim, but as the curator of a powerful, deeply personal new exhibition. Her poise and quiet strength, a stark contrast to the shell-shocked woman who had stumbled out of her violated Oakwood home. Her exhibition, The Art of Deception and Recovery, wasn't just a collection of works. It was a testament, a journey, a statement of resilience. Each piece, carefully chosen, explored themes of betrayal, hidden truths, the fragility of trust, and the arduous, often beautiful, path towards healing. Henry Bishop had taken a plea deal 15 years for wire fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. in exchange for providing testimony against Brenda Holloway and their other accomplices. Brenda, true to her defiant nature, was fighting the charges, but with Henry's testimony and the mountain of evidence the FBI had compiled from multiple jurisdictions, Agent Rebecca Miles, now more informally Rebecca to Eleanor, had confided that the prosecutor was confident Brenda was looking at 20 to 25 years. The wheels of justice were turning, slowly but inexorably. Most of the funds siphoned from the Atherton Charitable Trust were in the process of being recovered. The offshore accounts in the Isle of Man had been frozen, and repatriation, though a slow bureaucratic process, was underway. That, for Eleanor, was a profound relief. Those funds were meant to provide arts education to underserved communities, a legacy her mother had cherished, not to finance the escape of con artists. Susan Albright, her steadfast friend, was by her side at the gallery opening, her presence a warm, unwavering source of support, as it had been through the darkest days. "Full house, Eleanor," Susan observed, smiling as she handed Eleanor a fresh glass of sparkling water. "The reviews are already incredible. They're calling it revolutionary, cathartic." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "It's not just my vision, Susan. Each of these artists has experienced some form of betrayal or fraud. That authenticity, I think, is what resonates with people. Speaking of which," Susan said, lowering her voice slightly, "Agent Miles just arrived. She said she has some news." Eleanor nodded, scanning the crowded gallery until she spotted Rebecca near the entrance, looking somewhat out of place in the artistic gathering, despite her elegant pantsuit. Excusing herself, Eleanor made her way through the crowd. "Rebecca, I'm so glad you could make it. Please, it's Cassandra now, or at least call me Rebecca outside of an official capacity," the agent replied with a warm smile. "I wouldn't have missed this. Eleanor, the exhibition is powerful, and I did want to give you an update in person." They moved to a quieter corner of the gallery, where a bench offered respite from the bustling crowd. "The plea agreements are finalized," Rebecca confirmed, "and there's something else. We've identified 3 more victims of Brenda Holloway's previous scams, from her operations in Boston and Miami. They weren't as fortunate as you, Eleanor. They lost nearly everything before the fraud was discovered. The prosecutor wondered if you'd be willing to speak with them, perhaps help them through their recovery process. Your strength, your journey through this, has been remarkable." Eleanor considered the request. 6 months ago, she might have wanted to put as much distance as possible between herself and anything related to the crime that had upended her life. But now, having channeled her experience into this exhibition, into something productive and, she hoped, healing, the idea of helping others felt right, a natural extension of her own recovery. "I'd be happy to, Rebecca," she agreed. "Perhaps they'd even be interested in contributing to the next phase of this exhibition. We're expanding to include workshops on recovery and rebuilding." Rebecca smiled, visibly impressed by Eleanor's resilience. "I'll let them know." Later that evening, as the last guest departed and the gallery staff began closing procedures, Eleanor stood before the final piece in the exhibition, a powerful mixed media work she had created herself. The central image showed a house split in 2, one half pristine, perfect, the image of domestic bliss, the other half revealing hidden cameras, document shredders, and false bottoms and drawers. Layered throughout were fragments of the fraudulent documents Henry and Brenda had prepared, now rendered harmless, transformed into art materials, the FBI having permitted her to use redacted versions for the project after the evidence had been processed. At the bottom of the piece, barely visible unless one looked closely, was a small, defiant inscription, "The truth will out." She gathered her things, preparing to leave the renovated loft she now called home, a space entirely her own, decorated with items she had chosen herself, secured with a state-of-the-art system Rebecca had recommended. Her phone chimed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Vance. This is Claire from Seattle. Agent Miles gave me your contact information. I was one of Elizabeth Kaplan's, Brenda Holloway's, victims 3 years ago. I saw the online coverage of your exhibition. If your offer to connect with other survivors is genuine, I would be grateful. Some days, I still feel like I'm drowning in the aftermath. Eleanor read the message twice, then composed a reply. Claire, thank you for reaching out. The offer is absolutely genuine. The drowning feeling does subside. I promise. Let's meet next week. In the meantime, please know you're not alone in this journey. After sending the message, Eleanor put away her phone and took one last look around the gallery. 6 months ago, she had returned home to find her life shattered by betrayal and deception. Tonight, she was leaving a space she had filled with meaning, connection, and the quiet hum of healing. It wasn't the life she had planned, but as she stepped out into the cool Chicago evening, Eleanor Vance realized it might be something better, a life built not on blind trust, but on clear-eyed purpose and the authentic strength that comes only through surviving the unimaginable. Eleanor Vance's journey from the darkest night of betrayal to the quiet strength of a survivor who now helps others heal is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Her home was violated, her trust shattered, her very identity threatened, but from those ashes, she built not just a new life, but a beacon for others. Perhaps you, or someone you know, has faced a moment where the world seemed to crumble. What small spark of courage, what unexpected source of strength did you discover in the aftermath? We invite you to share your reflections, your stories of resilience, in the comments below. And if these journeys of overcoming profound adversity and finding justice speak to your heart, do consider subscribing and joining our community. We believe that in sharing these stories, we all find a little more light.